Coming up on today's episode, who said our attention span is worse than a goldfish? What is leisure work, and what does that have to do with productivity? Up next on The Mind Here. Hey, what is up everyone? It's the guy here, and welcome back to another episode of The Mind Here, the bi-weekly podcast where I talk about new knowledge I've learned, projects I'm working on, and current events. Topics may be random, but I hope that with each episode you can come away with a fresh perspective on the universe. Welcome to all of you who are here for the first time. If you like my content and want to see more, please consider subscribing. All right, let's begin with that attention span. This was brought up by an article that I read this week, and it was diving into the origins of the attention span and how our attention span is worse than a goldfish, and some ways to improve our attention span. Now, the first important thing that I wanted to talk about is that factoid about our attention span being worse than a goldfish. Is that really the case? The author of this article dives into it and tries to find the sources, going through all the trails, checking up on the original sources of the papers that were cited by the papers, and etc. And their finding is that that figure is essentially made up. The figures of maybe 8 seconds for an average attention span versus 9 seconds of a goldfish. They point out quite glaringly that, like, how would you measure the attention span of a goldfish? And then they looked into the actual source articles and asked the sources that were cited as for the numbers, and they basically said that there's no evidence that they had that supported that. So this entire thing was made up, and not to mention the fact that average attention span is essentially a useless figure. What does that even mean to have an average attention span? Does that mean that for everything you do, our average attention span means that we will only spend about 8 seconds focusing on it before we focus on something else? Attention is not something that is consistent for everything that we do. It depends on context, and it depends on essentially what you're doing. So the average is a pretty meaningless figure. Some figures are meaningless when you average it, and attention is one of them. The whole fallacy of that goldfish and how our modern society has made it so that our attention span is less than a goldfish is just plain wrong. However, the reasons that maybe this popped up and why it's so popular may be that because our attention spans are no longer as we desire for certain things, or when we're doing work, for example, it's not as great as we would like it to be. So there is merit in that aspect where we're not satisfied with how our attention spans are at the moment. So why is it? And sometimes you get the response that it's the fault of technology. The catch-all for all the modern problems, right? Technology has caused this to happen. And the real issue here is that technology itself is a tool. It has provided means for us to become distracted. It has provided means for us to escape whatever that we don't want to do. It has allowed us to do a lot of things, and because it's so versatile and has allowed us to do a lot of things, that people blame that, but that's not the root cause. It's just a means for escaping whatever we wanted to escape in the first place, or the mindset that we've developed that is averted to that has an aversion towards certain tasks or ideas, right? So technology cannot be to blame, because if technology didn't exist, which here they're probably referring to information technologies, not just technology in general. Again, that catch-all phrase makes no sense, but here let's just entertain ourselves and assume that it's the entertainment information technologies like the internet and mobile devices. So let's just say that we take that away. Is it really going to help us not get distracted? I mean, yes, there's less means to do so, so maybe we're forced to do some of the work that we want to do and we'll procrastinate a little less, but ultimately we still want to escape these desires. So what is it? Why is this happening? What is causing this? So some of the reasons why the author brought up why our attention spans might not be what we want it to be and why it's so sought after is because that our modern economy is based off of more knowledge work. More and more people are doing knowledge work, not is essentially physical labors. And even if you do, for example, work on cars and you're a machinist or something, or you do something more physical, you still have to interact with a lot more knowledge than before. You're not just simply doing repetitive tasks over and over again. That's the job of a robot that can do it more efficient and more cheaply. So automation has replaced that. So now humans need to use what humans are good at, which is their inferencing skills and putting things together with some general context that robotics and automation cannot do at the moment. That's what we're good at, but we need to have our attention there, and it needs to have that knowledge work there. So that's one of the reasons why, but also, again, brought up how technology has made it very easy to do a lot of things. So we have a lot of means to distract ourselves. So that's probably another reason why it feels like our attention is not that great, because we put it elsewhere. We have the ability to escape what we don't want to do. And another factor, more recent, is the virtualization of our interactions. So through internet and, from the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns and how things have gone virtual, working from home and virtual meetings with webcams off, they tend to decrease the accountability that you have to other people, and therefore you're more prone to getting distracted. If you're working from home, or if a meeting is just voice and no webcam, then you could be in multiple meetings or doing something completely outside of what you're doing in the meeting, right? So those factors combined are likely what brings together our perceived lack of attention that we want. So what are some factors that are impacting our attention span, besides those that are evidence that we want better attention span? So the author cites 4 reasons why. The first reason they cite is lack of purpose or intention behind what we do. I mean, if you're assigned a task for a class, or if you're given some work at work, from your workplace, and it's some tedious, meaningless work, then chances are your attention is not going to be great when you're doing it, because it doesn't mean anything to you. So that's the first reason why. The second reason why is novelty bias. We tend to like to have some new stimulus. So getting distracted from things is something new. Going on YouTube to seeing what's new there, again, novelty bias. The news itself is essentially built on that novelty bias of some new information coming in every hour. So again, novelty bias is another reason why we get distracted. And simply the fact that we might be overscheduling ourselves and trying to do too many things at the same time might be harming our ability to pay attention, because we're getting overwhelmed, and then we just sort of shut off from paying attention to things. And last but not least, there's that emotional discomfort from certain things that we do. Let's say, for example, that you got a really bad score on one of your tests in your class. Now, whenever you study for that class, you might have some emotional scarring of that bad score, and you might want to procrastinate and avoid work in that class because you know it's not something that you did well on, and it evokes a bad feeling. So emotional discomfort with whatever you're doing is also a factor in our poor attention span, or perceived poorness, lack of our attention span. So those are 4 pretty important reasons why that our attention spans may not be where we want it to be. So how do we improve that then? The author then again goes through the 4 pieces here and offers suggestions for us to improve our attention span. The first, about the intention and purpose, is to find a purpose, find a why in what you're doing, right? If you are in a class, remind yourself why you're taking that class, and maybe that work then might be more meaningful if you have some context behind it. Okay, this geometry kind of sucks, but if I want to be an engineer, then I would need to know how to do this geometry, or maybe I need to design a game. Now you have a reason why, and you can think of it in terms of that purpose, so you have a better chance of retaining attention that you want on the subject. And if it doesn't mean anything, why are you doing it in the first place, right? These are questions you ask so that you can select what you want to do and have better quality work and effort put into it. So that's the first, addressing that first point. The second point about novelty bias, the author actually suggests that you can take some micro micro distractions or little breaks. And these are breaks such as maybe looking out a window for a little while. Please say you have a window nearby. Or just taking a walk around the block or around in your workplace, getting a drink of water, just standing up and stretching. Little breaks like that give a little bit of novelty in what you're doing instead of a whole 7 hours sitting down at work or something like that. You have a little break to do something, but not something that'll easily get you sucked away into something else that's a little more entertaining. So a little bit of novelty there, and just mixing up your work after a little while, instead of sectioning too big of a block of work, having maybe splitting up in 2 to 3 hour chunks depending on how long you can effectively work on one project. That's another way to have some variety in your day so that it's not just some tedious and boring day. That'll improve your attention. And again, it gives you a little breathing space for your attention, so that you don't use it all up in one go and then fail to pay attention to whatever important work you've scheduled after the other important work and effortful work that you had there. And that brings it to the third point about attention overwhelm. You don't want to schedule two very attention heavy tasks, right, one after the other, right? You want to sort of give yourself a little breathing room for that attention. And of course, if you're doing multiple tasks, try to have these tasks not take up so much attention, because if you have one important task and another small one on the side, it might be too much. But if you have two tasks that you can sort of pay attention to and get it done pretty well, then yeah, that's kind of feasible to do multiple tasks at the same time. But so just be careful about what you're scheduling and how you're managing your attention. If you feel like your attention is on the brink, take a little break, because chances are if you try to push through it, you're not going to pay attention well, and the work that you produce is likely going to have to be reworked, and it's going to be wasted time. So make sure that you pay attention to your attention and how you're scheduling that. And the last point here is about that emotional discomfort. So certain work that maybe you just don't want to do at some point, there is a phenomenon of momentum that you have to overcome. And chances are, if you stick to, let's say, making sure that you do the work for at least 5 to 10 minutes, you might overcome the barrier and now be more willing to continue doing that work. So keeping in mind that momentum and barrier to overcoming that is pretty crucial. And if you have an urge to do something, maybe you're working on a paper and you have an urge to surf YouTube, like I do quite constantly. YouTube is a pretty familiar distraction for me. But one way to avoid this is to take some deep breaths, 10 deep breaths specifically when you feel that urge. And after your 10 deep breaths, ask yourself if you still want to go with that urge. This technique is called surfing the urge, where when you have an urge to do something, you just let that feeling sort of propagate throughout and to see if it dissipates or if it's still there. And promising yourself that if it's still there after you've taken mindfulness and the deep breaths, taken some time to let it surf over, if it's still there, then promising yourself you will allow yourself to do that is a good way to avoid doing it. Because chances are, by the time you're done with those deep breaths and that time, the urge has passed, you might not be feeling like you want to go with that distraction. You might, think to yourself, okay, why am I doing this? And what does this distraction really bring me, right? So that gives a chance for you to catch up and to bring yourself back on track, bring your focus into place. So those are some tips about how to improve your attention. And one important note that the author reminds us at the end of their article is that our brains are not optimized for focus. Evolutionarily, we are prone to distraction because if we're going to be, let's say, gathering berries somewhere, we want to pay attention to every little thing that happens just in case it's some tiger that's going to sneak up on us, right? But in our modern environments, that's not necessarily beneficial. So our brains are not optimized to focus, but we can work with these limitations and try to work around it, schedule around it, and do work around how our brain works rather than trying to force ourselves to get better attention, because chances are that's not going to work. So those are some insightful tips that the author wrote about in this paper. And I'll link down in the description both the article that I read that had these tips about improving our attention span and information about attention span, as well as the article that they cited about the fallacy of the goldfish and how our attention span is worse than the goldfish. So those are hopefully some good takeaways that you can take from this episode. So reflecting on the work that I did for the past 2 weeks here, I did manage to get some updates out for my Villager Defense Minecraft server plugin. However, it wasn't as many as I wanted, and I'm definitely behind on the deadlines that I've set for myself. So that's something that I will need to work on, but as I'll touch up on what I'll be doing going forward with my Minecraft plugins and other projects in the next section. But for now, just some reflection on what happened. I realized that I have a pretty bad tendency to indulge in distractions when I don't have anything scheduled in my schedule. There are certain times where maybe I finish tasks early, either because it was I genuinely finished it early and now I have a little bit of time between this and my next scheduled task, or I just finish it early because I have an urge to do something. But regardless, I have certain spaces in my schedule where it's empty. So I use that space to, I don't know, go and watch some YouTube videos or play some games, and just to fill up that time. But you know how things work. It's, for the most part, it's never going to be confined in that extra space. It's going to leak into the scheduled spaces that I had, and pretty soon it might consume the entire day. So those are some bad tendencies that I have noticed, a pattern that I have seen just from reflecting and journaling at the end of the day, realizing that this has happened. And that's something that I want to change. But another realization I had while I was reflecting on this bad tendency is that maybe I don't schedule enough true leisure time, and what I have instead is leisure work. So what is this? What is this new categorization of the work, the tasks that I do? Well, I've found that your work, your tasks that you do can probably be fit into these 3 categories of true work, leisure work, and true leisure. So the difference between here is true work is something where you are doing for the sake of your career or your personal development, something that you would be proud of, and some achievements that that chances are you put on your resume, or something that you wanted to be noted for if you were to disappear and you were noted down in history for this work, right? So that would be qualifying as true work. And true leisure here is, just entertainment that has no strings attached. You have no expectations going in. All it is just time for you to relax and debrief before you go into your other work. And also true work, you can put in chores in there or certain things like that where you kind of have to do, and it's just sort of maintenance. So that can qualify as true work there. And then in between, we have leisure work. This is work that is maybe more appropriate, called, passion projects, or certain things that you do as like hobbies, for example. These are activities that require some brain power and definitely still has a work feeling to it, but it's also fun, and chances are when you're doing true work, sometimes you might prefer doing this leisure work. But I've noticed that when I categorized my tasks that I've set out for the day and for the week and looked at what I've scheduled for myself, there's very little true leisure time in there. There's a lot of leisure work that I have, but not a lot of true leisure, and that's something that might not be sustainable. And the reason why I might be trying to find these distractions is because I don't have a release or a break after the end of each day or each week. So I'm looking for elsewhere because of that scarcity, and it's impacting everything, where my true work is not where I want it to be because I'm getting distracted, and my leisure work just doesn't feel like it's that leisure because I've been assuming that it's been true leisure, and the actual true leisure that I have is not sanctioned, and therefore feels guilty when I do it, and there's likely not enough of it, or I might be overcompensating with it because I don't feel like there's enough, and of that scarcity. So that's that's something that got me thinking, how do I improve that, right? And what is this meaning of this leisure work? So again, the improvement there is going to be just better categorization. Once I realize of this categorization, re-looking over my schedule and then seeing how much leisure work and how much true leisure and how much true work do I have? What times of the day are best for these? And do I have enough of it per day, per week, etc.? Do I have enough breaks in the cycle where I have these on cycles of doing a lot of intense true work, maybe a little lesser work of leisure work, and then some good true leisure at the end of the day? Do I have something like that going on? If not, then I need to change my schedule so that it's more sustainable and that my desire or just lack of attention at certain points of time, or maybe the ability to take a break, maybe that's affecting it. So making sure that that's in there. So just better scheduling and realization of that is going to be nice going forward. But this leisure work, I dug a little bit more into this idea, and something that I found is that when certain things that can be true leisure, when you decide to add a layer of bureaucracy to it. For example, maybe you have a Minecraft server or some other game where it's a sandbox or multiplayer, and you have, let's say, for example, initially you started it up to play with friends and you're just enjoying yourselves for a few hours on the weekends. But then you decided that you wanted to make a project, and then you needed to start planning, researching into this new project on your server, and you're doing things for it that now has a layer of bureaucracy to it. You need to maybe meet with your friends to discuss the layout and where you want to put it, or just how you're going to design a certain maybe mega machine or build. And now there's a layer of bureaucracy and work to it that has transformed it from that true leisure into leisure work. Now, if you only have that leisure work, you might burn yourself out on it because it's no longer true leisure that has that true break feeling of no strings attached, no expectations going in, right? This is the same thing that I found with when I started up the Minecraft series of my Minecraft Let's Play series, right? Because I was playing this mod pack and I felt like, hey, this is something pretty fun. Maybe I can make content out of it, right? But when you do that, it transforms from that true leisure to leisure work. And now you're going to have to put in a lot of extra effort, as I have realized, and a lot of planning into each session. You're not just going there to play. You have to have a plan going in. You have to be speaking your mind and thinking on your feet when you are playing. And then afterwards, you have to make sure that you have the recordings right, you have all the equipment down, then you have to do the editing, etc., etc. There's a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of extra work that makes it leisure work, where it's fun, for sure, but it has that feeling of work and the effort of work. It's there is no longer no expectations when you're going into each session. You now have an expectation, and that becomes leisure work. So that's a realization there. If you have an added layer of bureaucracy, it might transform whatever you're doing that might be leisure into leisure work. So keep that in mind, as that's a lesson that I've learned here. So hopefully that'll help you if you are in the market of making your own content, or just thinking about doing something like this and you're very prone to scheduling your days out and your tasks out. Keep that in mind. If you have something that is probably entertainment, but if you add that layer of extra work, for example, something that I have a bad tendency of doing is, for whatever interesting article that I have, I want to take notes on it. But that extra layer of work makes it transform from true leisure, to leisure work. So that's something to be aware of to help you maintain a more sustainable schedule and a better life. So now let's talk about some things that I want to do going forward. Now, keep in mind that my co-op session here or my internship here, if you're not familiar with co-ops, is about to end in about 2 weeks. So right around when I'm supposed to release my next episode, I'm going to be boarding a plane and flying back home. So chances are I'll be recording that episode beforehand and then scheduling it to be released then. But that being said, I'll need to start preparing for that trip back home, and I'll need to start packing things up, getting things thrown away, or moving things out. Just a lot of logistics there. So that's going to eat up a good amount of time. Not to mention the actual internship and work that I still have to do. But that being said, I was contacted by some server admins that were using my Villager Defense plugin, and they wanted me to make a new plugin for Christmas. So I told them I could do it in 2 weeks because it's very similar to Villager Defense and has some similar structures, but there's some certain new things that I'll have to do. But I gave myself 2 weeks, starting basically from today, to get them a working plugin. So that's what I will be focusing on, that and my move out. So that's something that'll happen. And after I finish that plugin, I plan on trying to make a video out of it, of the process that I went through, and just an explanation of the projects and how I manage these coding projects, these Minecraft plugins. So hopefully that'll be something that's entertaining, but I think that'll probably be able to go out depending on the amount of edits and how much prettying I want to do with the video. But that's something that I can probably release before the end of the year, but I will be working on that plugin for sure. That'll be something that I'll work on until next episode. But that'll wrap it up for this episode. Thank you all so much for listening. I appreciate the support that you all have given me. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. As always, if you've found my video to be inspiring or just useful in general, consider giving it a like so other people know that it's something that they might merit their time to watch. And if you think my series podcast is interesting, or if you like my content, consider subscribing so people know that my stuff is worth their time to watch. Anyways, take care, stay humble, and I'll see you all in the next episode.